Changed the nation forever. How the people who were there that day are marking the anniversary. And how freedom is changing in Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover. Also, the Mr. Food Test Kitchen gears up for Grandparents' Day with a traditional recipe handed down from Howard's Grandma Rose.
The 4 states' most watched news starts now.
Bells rang 3 times this morning in Washington, D.C., one for each location terrorists hit on September 11th, 2001. This is KOAM News at noon. I'm Tanya Bach. Our nation pauses tomorrow to remember the lives lost 20 years ago in New York, Washington, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, one of the darkest days in American history. At Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, where the Twin Towers once stood, family members and some who were here that day will gather tomorrow. Now, one of them, FDNY Deputy Commissioner on 9/11, Lynn Tierney. Her job at Ground Zero was to provide the fire commissioner with the latest info.
And be shattered. And then slowly, they saw the pieces coming back together. What they never saw was the exact same thing that happened to over 3,000 families, that their worlds came down in an instant and their lives were shattered.
At the New York Stock Exchange, traders held a moment of silence this morning to mark the day. Nearly 3,000 people died on 9/11, including 343 FDNY firefighters. Well, here in the 4 states, the Southeast Kansas Symphony performed a concert of remembrance at the Bicknell Family Center for the Arts yesterday. Pitt State ROTC presented and retired the colors. And the Pittsburgh Fire Department, under the leadership of Fire Chief Dennis Riley, who was in New York City when the attacks happened, performed a bell ringing. Well, several veterans and their families attended an expo in Joplin yesterday to reflect on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and the U.S.'s withdrawal from Afghanistan. It was held at the National Guard Armory on 32nd Street. One Army veteran who served in Afghanistan says having both happen at the same time is tough.
I've been reflecting a lot, especially with Afghanistan. It's really bad timing, and it shouldn't have happened then. And to look at it 20 years later to see not a lot has changed.
Thursday's expo was also a chance for veterans and their spouses to learn about veteran resources and career opportunities. Well, our break from the heat is over. Michael Hayslip joins us with the first look at our weekend forecast.
Kind of getting a break from the blue sky. Get to that in a second. First off, you were talking about Chief Dennis Riley there at Pittsburgh Fire Department. He's been extremely busy, not only with the number of conferences that he's had, but also to his role in leading up to 4-state observations with the 9/11 anniversary tomorrow. Fortunately, the chief kind enough to dedicate some of his time, and we're going to hear a little bit about of him and more from him coming up on our evening newscast. So,
all right.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate that. Outside of Television City, Tanya, it's almost hazy now. I will say that we do not have any air quality concerns. Our air quality is considered acceptable at this point. Temperatures, not too bad. Haze kind of slowed down the sun a little bit. We are already working up into the mid-80s there in Miami and in Welsh. Throw Neosho in. So really south of I-44 is where you're going to see mid-80s. Get up to the north, you'll notice 81 still in Fort Scott and Nevada. Iola chilling out at 79 degrees. Can't beat that. Nice thing today is we don't have to worry about any humidity. In fact, we're rather abnormally dry. So if you headed out doing any yard work and you're like, we may be able to burn that this week. Well, I tell you what, let's think twice about it. Number one, because we are so dry, but number two, with the heat and the jet stream shifting to the east, it is also going to be windy. On Saturday and Sunday, we're not only going to have the mid-90s, but also to about 25, 30 mile an hour gusts. Tanya, coming up here in just a little bit, we know we've got a full night of high school football on the gridiron for Friday. We've also got 2 home games for Pitt State and Missouri Southern coming up on Saturday. Take a look at our kickoff times and what you can expect for your travel conditions right after this.
There's a lot of football going on this weekend for sure.
Yup.
All right, thanks, Michael. The Taliban takeover of Afghanistan has left millions of residents in limbo, wondering what freedoms they'll still have. CBS's Ian Lee gives us a look at what life is looking like under the new Taliban.
It's only been a month, but the Taliban is already making its mark. The group's flag and logo cover the walls of the U.S. Embassy. This graffiti reads, "Brothers, happiness in freedom." But those so-called freedoms are under threat. The Taliban uses tasers, tear gas, and guns to stop protests as women demand equal rights.
Still putting widely her chest to the gun demonstrates the level of changes and positive change of the society in Afghanistan.
Life has fundamentally changed in the country. Local barbers see business cut as more men grow beards like their new rulers. Girls are still in school, but they're separated from the boys. Women must also wear head coverings. For Afghanistan's renowned all-female orchestra, the music has stopped. Once a symbol of freedom, its members are in hiding, fearful the Taliban will ban music like it did in the 90s. This time around, the Taliban is trying to show a more moderate image. But acts of defiance are still met with a heavy hand. These Afghan journalists say they were tortured for covering a protest. Many fear Afghanistan's new Taliban will be just like the old one. Ian Lee, CBS News.
The Taliban's interim government is made up of all men, many senior Taliban figures notorious for attacks on U.S. forces over the last 2 decades. That's a look at today's top stories and weather in our first 7 minutes. Up next on KOAM News at Noon.
As we approach the 20th anniversary of September 11th, one group is doing its part to make sure future generations remember what happened that day, but also about the 40 heroes on board that aircraft in Shanksville. I'm Skylar Henry at the Flight 93 Memorial in Pennsylvania with a look at how it's impacting students across the country.
And later, Howard's making the best ever noodle pudding today in the Mr. Food Test kitchen. As we approach the 20th anniversary of September 11th, many teachers are looking for ways to convey the impact of that day to a new generation. Friends of Flight 93 is working to provide those tools to educators across the country and welcoming classes to the National Memorial that tells the story of the 40 passengers and crew who died there. Skylar Henry reports from Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
In this spot in rural Pennsylvania, history is alive for teachers Tina Johnston and Katie Speary.
I remember what that day was like. We got out of school early.
The Flight 93 National Memorial helps Speary tell the 9/11 story to students who weren't alive to remember that day.
I think we all have that job to share our experience.
Johnston, now retired, volunteers to teach the difficult subject.
They didn't know when they got on that plane the hand that fate dealt them and how they faced it.
She brought her classes to this site where Flight 93 crashed after the passengers and crew attempted to regain control from the hijackers, weaving Shakespeare into the lesson.
We looked at the story of Hamlet. We looked at Hamlet's last words, tell my story, and this is a story that needs to be told.
The nonprofit Friends of Flight 93 helps educators tell the 9/11 story.
We work with teachers out of Florida and out of Ohio.
Danielle Miller coordinates with teachers across the country, both in person and virtually, offering students workshops and tours.
What do you think it means to be able to teach that generation who wasn't alive for 9/11?
It means keeping a promise that the nation made 20 years ago. Those of us with living memories of the event are never going to forget what September 11, 2001 was like.
You can't teach history without empathy.
Ohio middle school teacher Scott Marsh is using these tools in his classroom.
We're trying to introduce my kids to a world that's not the same now as it was back then.
Now they participate in a University of Pittsburgh study exploring how the Flight 93 Memorial and other sites resonate with children.
Kids do see the sites different than adults do, and just to rely on what an adult thinks a kid will think isn't always a good idea because the kids have different viewpoints on things.
A new generation making its own connection to a pivotal day in our nation's history. Skylar Henry, CBS News, Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Well, the Friends of Flight 93 say they're busy as ever this fall with already 27 field trips with 14 virtual classroom visits. Still to come on the KOAM News at Noon, Mr. Food.
Years ago, I got a recipe from my grandmother that I want to share with you. And the timing couldn't be better, since this weekend is Grandparents' Day.
But first, Michael Hayslip returns with your complete forecast.
Hope your Friday and early after morning has been delightful. Now as we get into the 10th day of September, just about feel like we can call it the middle of the 9th month. I want to talk a little bit about our sky color here. Over 7th and Rangeline, it's not a crisp, bright blue, but it's certainly a lot more blue than what we're seeing outside of Television City. It's almost like a gray haze that we have. So let's go ahead and jump to our air quality map, interactive-wise, and you can tell that the central portion of the 4 states there is considered in that yellow category. Now, that's it's nothing terrible by any means, but it does give you an idea with the over here, the particulate matter and the ozone. And when we put ourselves in that yellow quality, it means it's acceptable, however, may be a risk for some people, particularly those who are unusually sensitive to air pollution. So I just wanted to make sure that we tackled that here before we moved into the weekend. Our temperatures range anywhere from, say 79 to 81, as not a whole lot of variety. We're not exactly all over the place by any means, and that's a good thing. 2 things of note that are going to stick around. One of those is going to be the wind. Now we're seeing it inch up to double digits. How about 20 miles an hour in Joplin? Everybody else in between 10 to 20. And it's not going to die down anytime soon. This is going to stay with us. But luckily, it's not going to be a combination of high wind and high humidity. Humidity is going to stay very, very low all the way through the weekend. Almost a little too dry, if you will. Little bump up from yesterday, but certainly not the double-digit increase that we had this morning. Wonderful looking Skywatch storm tracker, not only for us, but for most of the Midwest. Big difference with the jet stream is how it's progressed just a little bit to the east. Yesterday, it's coming about straight down through us. Now we're seeing those arrows begin to split and make their way east of the Mississippi. And second consecutive day, that cutoff low has been staying right there. Do love the fact that we're seeing some rain up in the Pacific Northwest. They need it to help with the fires, and it's not looking like anything severe. Quick check on the tropics. Larry now a Category 1, staying pretty far off the East Coast, making its way up to the weekend, and just about canceled all the warnings and watches that we've had on the east for him. Didn't want to point this out. This is kind of curious. This is the remnants of Mindy. We're not worried about her anymore. But at one point in time, back when Larry had dropped down a little bit to the south, they're just about on a collision course. And then when we reconvene on Monday, tell you what we're going to be talking about is going to be a low pressure system. I can kind of put it for you. We don't want that high pressure system. Here, let's exactly nail this thing here. This low pressure system right here, right in there. Okay. Aha! I knew I'd get it. Anyway, that's the one we're going to look at as this thing comes over the Yucatan. It's going to make its way into the Gulf. If that sounds familiar, this time of year is when those conditions are ripe for those to reform. Watches and warnings, though, for the most part, of course, staying up in Big Sky country, Pacific Northwest, West Coast with all the heat and the fire activity. Like I said, hopefully we can feed them some rain here by the time Friday is over. Our weather trend going to lift us up into the low 90s this afternoon. Let's talk about a little high school football action. High school kickoff temperatures. We're going to be sitting, that's the 7 o'clock temperatures you see there on the main map. So mid-80s, not bad considering we'll be at peak around 91 right there, and no travel concerns throughout our Friday night if you're coming and going. So Saturday morning, waking up in the 70s, 2 o'clock, Fred G. Hughes Stadium, Missouri Southern Lions first home game. It's going to be hot, especially down there on the turf. We're talking about 91 degrees. We're talking about feeling, probably I'd say about 100 if you're down there actually inside the bowl on the stadium. And then 7 o'clock in Pittsburgh at Carney Smith Stadium. Backs off a little bit. We'll go mid-80s for the Gorillas home opener against Nebraska Kearney. For those of you that want to watch the Chiefs on Sunday right here on KOAM, might be the perfect day to turn on the air conditioner, get out of the heat for a little bit, enjoy a Sunday, full Sunday of NFL action.
All right. Yeah, it's going to be a football weekend, and my third grader's playing his first tackle football game on Saturday as well, so got that on top of everything else. All right, sounds like fun.
It'll be hot.
All right, thanks, Michael. We take this time to honor today's four-state hero, Private First Class Lawrence Boggs, who served in the United States Army from 1945 to 1947. He was stationed in Germany. decorated soldier hails from Independence, Kansas. We salute Lawrence Boggs, our four-state hero. Sunday is Grandparents' Day. Howard honors his grandmother with today's special recipe made with a lot of noodles and even more TLC. It's the best ever noodle pudding today in the Mr. Food Test Kitchen.
In case you didn't realize it, this Sunday is Grandparents' Day, a day set aside to celebrate our mom and dad's mom and dad. While you're coming up with ways to make them feel extra special, why not take a few extra minutes to learn something from them? This was something I did with my grandmother Rose before she passed away. I asked her to share a few of her favorite recipes with me so that they could live on as part of her legacy. She did, and now I want to share one of them with you. It's her noodle pudding, or as we call it, kugel, and boy is it good. She told me how she made it and how much pleasure she got from serving it to her family. Then my grandmother let me in on what her secret ingredient was. It's lots of TLC. For those of you who aren't familiar with noodle pudding, it might sound a bit odd, but think of it as a really tasty bread pudding, only made with noodles instead of bread. To get the recipe for our best ever noodle pudding, all you have to do is visit our website. I'm Howard in the Mr. Food Test Kitchen, where today we found a grandmotherly way for you to say, ooh, it's so good.
You can find this recipe along with a lot more good food from the Mr. Food Test Kitchen online. Just go to our website at KOAMnewsnow.com. Here's a look at our four-state market prices.
Step outside right now is actually really nice. Yeah, it's a little bit warm, but that southerly breeze, it helps. It, makes it nice and comfortable outside. For kickoff, we're looking at temperatures mid to low 80s. Remember, change of pace there for our college games on Saturday. We're into the mid 90s.
What do we have coming up tonight at 5?
Well, at 5, the pandemic created supply chain shortages throughout the economy. While some businesses have returned to normal, the car shortage hitting dealerships nationwide is getting worse. We're going to look at how much longer that could continue. Plus, we're going to show you the ceremony held at McDonald County Schools to recognize the 9/11 anniversary. And a trail connecting the MSSU campus to North Park Mall is complete. Hope you join us for those stories and a lot more. It's coming up on KOAM News at 5.
All right, thank you, Dow. Thanks for joining us for KOAM News at noon. We'll see you right back here at 5 o'clock.